There's no way I'll let your mother hug it all. $6.6 million is too much for a senile old lady, don't you think? The $1 billion in assets in the position of company president will be inherited by my husband, who is the eldest son, and not a single penny will go to your mother, so be prepared for that." Shocked by Rose's harsh words, until now the eldest son and his wife had repeatedly behaved atrociously, as if they had forgotten the favors they owed us. And yet, to think they'd only show interest in the inheritance after John's death. They never once showed their faces to visit John when he was ill. I can't stand the thought of letting the eldest son and his wife have their way. I must find a way to give them a taste of their own medicine. Feeling this, I decided to take revenge on the eldest son and his wife. I will definitely thoroughly drag them down to hell. My name is Emily, a 58-year-old housewife. I live with my husband John. We have one son between us. Our eldest son Mike lives near our home, having built his own family. I want to marry this person. The woman introduced as Rose was dignified, easy to talk to, and seemed to possess a charming femininity. I felt that she could be accepted as part of our family. With that feeling, I consented to welcome her into our family, and the wedding of Mike and Rose went off without a hitch. Among us, John was quite fond of Rose, often inviting her out to meals, and even planning trips for their wedding anniversaries. It seemed that Mike and Rose were pleased with John's own way of celebrating. The wheels of happiness fell off when John fell ill. One day, while doing housework, the phone rang. It was from an employee at John's company, and upon hearing what had happened, I was told that John had collapsed at work. I immediately packed my bags and rushed to the hospital to which he had been transported. John had not yet regained consciousness. Shortly after, Mike and Rose arrived at the hospital. Beside a sleeping John, a doctor explained his medical condition. "He probably has about a year to live." Dizzy with the doctor's words. A year? But he seemed so healthy until recently? Unable to accept the sudden declaration of his remaining time, I stood bewildered. Beside me, Mike and Rose were whispering something to each other. After discussing with the doctor, we decided to admit John to the hospital to extend his life as much as possible until the light of his life goes out. Fortunately, John is a company president with ample assets. The hospitalization costs could be covered easily. After finishing various discussions, the doctor left the hospital room to see the next patient, leaving only our family behind. I hold John's hand. It's paler than usual and slightly cold, a harsh reminder of the reality we are facing. "Emily, I have something to tell you." Rose addressed me while I was lost in thought. Wondering what it could be, I tilted my head, and then Rose spoke again. "We will not come to visit any more. Seeing John like this is too sad for us. So from now on, please take care of him, Emily." I was so surprised by Rose's words that I couldn't say anything. I understand that it is shocking to see John in this condition, but to never visit again? They might never see John again if they do that. As I remained speechless, Mike continued speaking. "It's hard for us to see Dad like this, too. Sorry, but we have our own lives to lead, and we think Dad would be happier if Mom were the one by his side." With those words, Mike and Rose quickly packed their things and left the hospital room. Left alone, I held John's hand, afraid of what the future holds and wondering what to do next. After a while, John regained consciousness. He seemed clearer than I had imagined, and when I told him about collapsing at the company and what the doctor had explained, he became visibly downcast, yet still his eyes were fixed forward. "By the way, haven't Mike and the others come?" I couldn't say anything in response to John's question. Surely, if he heard about Mike and the rest, it would only make him more depressed. It wouldn't be right for him to be left with regrets when he was told he only had a year to live. With that thought, I deceived him about Mike and the others. They said they're busy with work, but don't worry, I'll be here with you. Yes, it'll be all right because I am here. Somehow it'll be all right. That's what I kept telling myself. True to their word, Mike and Rose didn't visit at all. Instead, I visited the hospital every day. Every time we met, John would look sadly down and mutter, "They didn't come today either." Unable to bear seeing him like that, I sometimes found myself calling Rose from the hospital's public space. "John is looking very energetic today. He seems lonely not being able to see you. Could you perhaps come even if it's just Rose?" "I'm sorry, but it's too painful to see John. Just thinking that we won't be together for another year." Rose was adamant, refusing to come for a visit. Still, my intuition told me not to give up. I desperately tried to persuade Rose, saying I would even come to pick her up, when suddenly her attitude changed. "Ah, you're so persistent." I let out an involuntary "huh?" in response to Rose's remark. Ignoring my astonishment, Rose blurted out something unbelievable. "I'm sorry, but visiting is such a hassle. If we have time for that, wouldn't it be more meaningful to go out for lunch with friends or spend time as a couple? We're going to be the next president and the president's wife, you know. We can't afford to waste our time." "How could you say such a thing?" "Just stop it. Please don't ever ask me to visit again. I'm busy." With those words, Rose hung up the phone without waiting for a reply. I was so disheartened by Rose's unexpected stance, something I could never share with John. "You seem a bit down," John said with concern as he saw me return. I'm fine." My response came out trembling, but I couldn't tell John the truth, so I stayed silent, saying nothing more, and I continued to visit the hospital every day. I stayed in the hospital room from the beginning to the end of visiting hours, to the point where I became good friends with the hospital staff. John always smiled so happily when he saw me. It was that smile that gave me the strength to keep going. A year passed, and John's long battle with illness came to an end. He was so energetic to the end that I doubted if he was really sick. The funeral, the preparation of the grave, and many other things were difficult, but I managed everything alone as the chief mourner. Mike and Rose didn't offer help or even a word of support. They showed up for the funeral, but they didn't greet anyone during the meal, just fiddling with their phones in a corner. Their lack of social etiquette as adults was astonishing. After the cremation, I placed the urn on the altar. John, now significantly reduced in size, had come home for the first time in a while. That's when Mike and Rose spoke to me. "I'm sorry about Dad. We should have helped more instead of leaving it all to you, Mom." Mike said this and gave me a comforting pat on the back, but such gestures did nothing to heal the wound in my heart or the sense of loss from having lost something precious. John had spoken to me happily, but he still seemed lonely, because Mike and Rose, whom he cherished so much, had not shown their faces even once. Thinking about it, I couldn't honestly interact with them. Maybe disgusted by my demeanor, Rose spoke up and said something outrageous. "What about the inheritance?" Amidst the sorrow, I didn't want to talk about money, but Rose didn't seem to care about how I felt. As I stayed silent, Rose spoke up again. "There's no way you're going to keep it all to yourself. $6.6 million is too much for a senile old woman, isn't it? The inheritance of $6.6 million and the position of president will go to my husband, the eldest son. Don't expect a single penny for yourself. That's how it's going to be." I was left speechless by Rose's words. Anger mingled with my sorrow, despite the fact that she hardly visited him, despite her lack of help during the funeral, despite her ignorance of how lonely John felt. Rose's outrageous words spurred me into action. For myself and for John, I resolved to make sure she deeply regret her actions. Just wait a moment, please. With that, I took up John's will, which I had received from the lawyer. I had read its contents before, but I felt the need to check the details once more. Mike and Rose looked puzzled by my actions, but this was very important. After confirming the contents, I breathed a sigh of relief. Surely the wise John knew everything. He knew all about the effort I had made, all by myself. John had always been watching over me. That must be the reason for this will. As I ruminated over the will's contents, Rose's earlier words came back to me. The inheritance of $6.6 million and the position of president will go to my husband, the eldest son. At the absurdity of her words, a smile slipped out, and then I couldn't stop myself. I started laughing, clapping my hands, and burst into outright laughter. What are you laughing at? Mom, what's wrong? Have you lost your mind? Mike and Rose looked worried as they saw me suddenly start laughing. But once I started laughing, I couldn't stop. To a third party, my behavior must have seemed quite mad. Wondering if my behavior seemed uncanny, Rose blurted out, "We will discuss the inheritance later. Make sure everything is in order, please." And taking Mike by the hand, they left the house. And so I was left alone in the house. I will never accept this. I'm going to make sure they get what they deserve, I murmured to John's picture. John no longer responded to my words, but I knew he was still with me. Then I had a whirlwind of days. The procedures for the inheritance in dealing with John's company took more time than I expected. When everything was finally settled, perhaps wondering why there had been no update about the inheritance, Rose called. "Emily, what about the inheritance? Stop dawdling and get on with the procedures. We've been waiting for so long, you know." That was the gist of her prodding. Indeed, a considerable time had passed since John's death, and it was natural for Rose, who was eyeing the inheritance, to be getting impatient. "Understood. I'll try to get in touch as soon as possible." "Please do, and don't you dare touch the inheritance, even if you're getting senile. If you do something like that, you'll be disowned by the family." Rose's heartless words would have caused me pain before, but now that I no longer cared about Rose, those words didn't hurt at all. Still, it's not good to keep someone waiting too long. I contacted the lawyer that John was fond of. This lawyer had been present before writing John's will and was keen to explain it to Mike and Rose, responding eagerly to my request for their involvement. Afterwards, I made sure to contact Mike and Rose. As the day arrived, I waited in the house with the lawyer, and then the front door burst open. "Where's the inheritance? I won't forgive you if you have your hands on $6.6 million. Saying this, Mike and Rose strolled into the house. They never showed their faces during John's hospitalization, but now, when money was involved, they came eagerly. "Why would I have touched it? I'm not as greedy about money as you are, Rose, and I would never touch the money before the procedures are done." Rose's behavior was truly awful, and the fact that Mike just went along with it without any objections is inexcusable. "Greedy? You don't need to say things like that. Just get on with the inheritance issue, please. That's what we came here for." Frustrated, Rose insisted like that. Finally, accepting that it was impossible to postpone any longer, I asked the lawyer to read John's will. First, regarding the inheritance. Upon hearing what followed, the couple's eyes widened. "That can't be. This must be some mistake." The will read by the lawyer contained details about the distribution of the inheritance. It stated clearly that all of John's accumulated assets were to be left to me, not a single penny to his eldest son, Mike. Why did this happen? The reason was also written in the will. Mike and Rose had not visited once during the hospitalization. I knew the reason, but Mike kept silent about it to John. However, John noticed something was amiss with me. Suspicious, John had his employees check on the situation. Since Mike was supposed to become the next president and worked in John's company, it was easy to investigate his actions. It turned out that Mike had been talking about the inheritance with his colleagues. I'll soon own the $6.6 million. I feel relieved just thinking about the old man being gone. Upon receiving such a report, John was determined not to leave them any inheritance. What are you doing? I told you to keep the inheritance matter to yourself. Hearing the contents of the will, Rose's face turned red with rage as she grabbed Mike by the collar. Mike had probably let his guard down because he almost certainly thought he would become the next president and that the inheritance was assured. Sorry, I never thought it would come to this, Mike said, apologizing with a pale face. However, such a thing did not calm Rose's anger. After all, she was forced to give up the inheritance she desperately wanted due to a single action by Mike. This happened because you didn't handle things properly. If there's no inheritance, you are worthless to me. We are getting a divorce. A divorce. Rose said those words to Mike. From these words, it was clear she married Mike only for the inheritance from the beginning. It was unimaginable that a woman who was welcomed into the family could have such a terrible nature. The fact that we faced this as a family, trying our best together, now seems foolish to me. But the revenge drama wasn't over yet. I had another decisive trump card up my sleeve. You speak so casually about divorce, as if you have someone else to replace Mike. If it's just about not getting the money, putting a strike in the family register for such a reason is a risky move. It's a strange story by any normal standard, but Rose was capable of doing that, and I have evidence of it. What are you talking about? There's no such replacement, Rose said blatantly, avoiding my gaze. Her action was too much of a yes, but I inadvertently let out a laugh. Since you seem to have no idea, I'll show you the evidence I have for now. Wait, please! Rose tried to stop me, but I didn't care and took an envelope from the cupboard and scattered the photos inside it across the table. Mike approached the table with keen interest. Rose, trying to stop him, pulled at his sleeve and pleaded, Please don't look. It's really nothing important. But the difference in strength between men and women was clear, and Mike reached the table anyway. The photos showed Rose with a certain man. The two of them were walking through the night city arm in arm. Each photo showed their relationship was quite close, as if to indicate the intimacy between them. You've been cheating on me, you bitch. Yes? These photos are evidence of Rose's infidelity. I had been consulting with lawyers and trustworthy people about the inheritance issue, and one of them advised me to investigate Rose's background. I decided it was best to be cautious, so I hired a detective agency to look into it, and they found damning evidence. Seeing the photos, Mike's face turned from pale to beet red in an instant. Then he grabbed Rose by the collar and yelled at her loudly. What were you thinking? Were you planning to divorce me and move on to that guy? You're the worst kind of woman. Mike's loud shouting was justified. After all, the person he had trusted and been with, aiming for the inheritance as a common goal, had been betraying him, ready to cast him aside at any moment. It's not my fault. The bad one is Mike. You made me feel lonely. You were always busy with work because you were going to be the next president, and you never made time for me. This is your own doing. Indeed, Mike had been dedicated to his work in anticipation of becoming the next president. I had heard about this from John, the president, and it seemed Mike was seriously aiming for that position. Just for your information, Mike is no longer going to be the next president. An employee whom John trusts will succeed him. It was written in the will. At those words, Mike looked as though he had sunk into despair, and rightfully so, since he had put in a lot of effort to succeed John. But all of this was due to their own fault for being blinded by inheritance and status, neglecting their relationship with John. If only they had behaved properly as a family until the very end of John's life, this wouldn't have happened. Mom, this isn't true, right? Dad would never say such a thing. As Mike tried to escape from reality, I looked at the lawyer and asked, "It's written there, isn't it?" The lawyer nodded affirmatively. Seeing this, Mike seemed to lose his ability to accept reality, his expression gone. "You deserve it. This is what you get for looking down on me." Rose seemed to have a triumphant smile on her face for some reason. However, there's no way Rose will be allowed to obtain happiness alone. Divorce. I will divorce you and claim hefty damages. So be prepared for that. Ah, damages. When Mike mentioned alimony, Rose's eyes widened. Alimony often brings to mind the image of a large sum of money being demanded. Rose probably had the same image in mind. "Let's not go through with the divorce after all. There's no way I can pay for something like damages." Rose quickly flipped her stance, retracting her own words. However, Mike seemed resolute in his decision. "No, it's definitely divorce. It's already decided." Saying so, Mike left the house with a gust of breath. "Wait!" Rose called out, leaving the house as if chasing after him. Finally, the storm had passed. My tale of revenge is over. All that remained was to watch how their relationship would unfold. As it turns out, in accordance with Mike's declaration, the two did get divorced. Rose seemed resistant until the end, but Mike's determination was firm, and no matter what was said, he intended to divorce. They went through divorce negotiations, and the divorce was amicably settled. Additionally, Mike claimed damages for Rose's infidelity. I had noticed during the investigation of Rose, but she had been dipping into the household expenses for her lover, so Mike also claimed the amount she had misused. Unable to pay, Rose tearfully turned to her parents, but by that time Mike had already reached out to them, and her parents were furious with Rose. Her parents paid the damages instead, but in return they made her promise to work like a draft horse in their home, and now she is reportedly working day and night without rest. Rose quickly complained about the life that was a far cry from that of the corporate president's wife. Meanwhile, having lost his seat as a future president, Mike felt uncomfortable at the company and resigned. He is now working as an employee in a general company, living a solitary life. Thus, the troubles surrounding John and me have subsided. To be honest, it was a difficult time. Yet now, having cleanly severed ties with Rose and Mike, I am able to spend peaceful days. The decision to cut off important family members, to be honest, wavered many times. But I could never forgive them for mocking John. It was John's presence that pushed me forward. From here on, I want to lead a life that does not shame me as John's wife in my own way.